The Empress returns by Iowa forever. Chapter 3.07, The Sword of Redemption. Lady Olivier, a voice called through a nearby vox. Sarai finished buttoning her dress uniform before opening the channel. The cutter from the Sanguinium Martyrs has arrived, and will be completing its landing cycle soon. Good. She replied, turning her attention to her headband as she continued. Have the second platoon hold them there, I will be down in just a moment. In the meantime, continue your scans to ensure nothing came through with them. Yes, my lady. The vox closed out just as Sarai slipped her headband on, her powers dropping back to manageable levels. Taking a moment to ready herself, she turned and stepped out of her room, two Khazarkan guards forming up behind her as she made her way down the main hall to the hangar. There were a number of alternate paths that would have gotten her to the hangar without having to take in the gaudiness of the main hall, bedecked as it was in gold and the trophies of her mentor's expeditions, but time was of the essence and Sarai did not wish to keep her guests waiting for much longer. Allowing suspicions to rise would only complicate matters. Sarai turned and stepped into the hangar, spotting the cutter on the far end of the floor. Between her and the newcomers stood a platoon of Khazarkan, the troopers holding a loose formation around the cutter as they waited for her. Even with her headband on, she could feel the mix of emotions radiating from the troopers. Kadia may have died 7 years prior, but these soldiers were still ready and willing to face down any new threats, perhaps a bit too eager. At ease, soldiers, she called, drawing attention from the Khazarkan. Let us not be too hasty in greeting our guests. The Khazarkan said nothing, but did draw back to allow Sarai and her bodyguards to step forward, just as the ramp to the cutter lowered. Sarai stopped, crossing her arms behind her back as the first of the new arrivals appeared. Down the ramp came 5 Sisters of Battle, members of the Order of Our Martyred Lady if their black armor and red robes were any indication. The Sister Superior and one of her subordinates were helmeted, leaving 2 others Sarai guessed were twins and a cheery-looking girl carrying a gold-plated heavy flamer. Sarai had to stop herself as she surveyed the group once more, noting that one of the twins had a similarly colored narthecium strapped to her arm. Sororitas do not indulge in that level of decadence, not all of them, anyways. Perhaps some kind of artifact? Sarai was so caught up in speculation that she almost missed the next group. Inquisitor Velas, she guessed, flanked on either side by 2 Valhallan stormtroopers. The Inquisitor was haggard, his face scruffy and lined, but he was trying his damnedest to appear alert and prepared for all that he would face. He was not as jumpy as some members of the Ordo Xenos Sarai had encountered during her time as an Inquisitor, but perhaps his weariness was behind that. Next was a sight Sarai had never expected to see in her lifetime, even if news of the Primarch's return had been circulating quickly in the last 10 years. A black-skinned giant clad in green and golden armor, so tall he almost knelt trying to get out from the cutter. A gilded hammer and a golden-tipped spear dangled from his waist, and his back was covered in a cloak of dragon scales. Once he had freed himself from the cutter, the Primarch turned and gave the assembled soldiers a friendly smile, one that Sarai found herself returning despite the shock of seeing a Primarch in the flesh. That left the final member of the entourage, the only person in the entire Imperium Sarai was dreading to see save perhaps Celestia, but then that was another matter entirely. Her hair was a mite longer than the grainy photo she had seen from the Empress reveal, her toned body visible even beneath the administratum robes she wore. Her eyes darted about in a mix of wonder and concern, as if she were stepping into the Imperium for the first time. She appeared to carry no weapons on her, but she was Celestia's student, her very being was a weapon unto itself, and if the reports Sarai had read were to be believed, she was quite adept at wielding her powers. Sarai would play it safe, lest she out herself any further to Twilight Sparkle. Welcome aboard the Sword of Redemption, Sarai said once the new arrivals were all assembled. I apologize for the martial greeting, but I have to take all precautions. Understandable, the other Inquisitor replied. He turned slightly and motioned for Twilight to come forward. This is the Empress student, Terra. As you can see, she is alive and healthy, just as I said she would be. Hello, the student stammered, keeping a friendly smile up as she made eye contact with Sarai. It's a pleasure to meet you, Inquisitor Olivier. You may call me Sarai, if that is easier for you to remember. Sarai allowed her gaze to soften. I understand that you have been through much since the Empress brought you into this whole mess, but there's no need to fear me. Twilight blinked a few times, though her smile did grow more confident as Sarai turned back to the others. Briefly her mind fell towards how she would approach the Primarch. To treat someone of that stature as merely a member of an Inquisitor's entourage would be inappropriate if not horrendously insulting, but then genuflecting in copious praise might undercut her rapport with Velas and Twilight Sparkle. No, it wouldn't. They understand what it's like to stand in the presence of gods perhaps even better than I. And she started, keeping her eyes from meeting the Primarch's own. And I see we are joined by one of the Empress Primarchs. A quick bow would suffice as a sign of respect. Forgive me, my lord, but if I had known you would be gracing us with your presence, I would have done away with all this suspicion and... There is no need to apologize for doing your duty, the Primarch said, his voice soothing. And I am not one that you must always refers to me as Lord. You may call me Vulcan if you wish. If that is what you say, El Vulcan, Sarai replied, rising up and smoothing a wrinkle out of her uniform. Well then, it is good to see that my suspicions were unfounded, especially if one travels in the company of a Primarch. A gross simplification, but if it would set their minds at ease. On the subject of travels, Inquisitor Velos started. We are in need to return to the Imperium, preferably somewhere where my ship can be repaired. Of course, Sarai said, turning back to the other Inquisitor. As it happens, you have had the fortune of arriving quite close to Ultramar, a few light years directly down from the systems to be exact. One did not have to be a telepath to see the shock and frustration radiating from the Inquisitor, but Sarai did find herself reaching out to touch his mind all the same. Down? Of course, it would have to be down. Of all the ways the universe seeks to destroy us. The Inquisitor's mind calmed, the man himself turning slightly to hide his face from Twilight. Calm, Matthias, Twilight is safe, and this Inquisitor won't do anything to harm her for now. So he knew Twilight was not from the Imperium? The girl seemed to trust him, so Sarai would not have to worry about him doing anything irrational to hurt Twilight. If he would do anything against the Ordo Malleus would have to be seen. What are you doing? Sarai's power snapped back at Twilight's question. I'm sorry? She asked, turning back to the other girl. I sensed you were using some kind of spell just then, Twilight continued. It didn't seem threatening, but I was curious as to just what it was that you were doing. At the word spell, all the sisters and Inquisitor Velos snapped their attention to Sarai. A veteran Inquisitor would not shrink away from such surprise, though Sarai could feel her jaw tightening as the situation became more tense. I am sorry, I did not know it would be an issue, she said, raising a hand to calm the others. I am a tele-empath, and I had hoped to ease some of Lord Velos' worries concerning the circumstances of your arrival back in real space. I meant no offense. Tele-empath? Twilight asked, pushing aside some of her bodyguards as she drew closer to Sarai. Like, a combination of telepathy and empathic sensation? Yes, Sarai started, taking a step back to compensate for the younger woman's enthusiasm. I take it you've heard of this branch of study? I studied it when I was younger, back when the Empress first took me on as a student, but I was never any good. Twilight gave a shrug before continuing. But, if you're not against it, I'd love for a chance to study your notes. Oh, of course, Sarai said, giving a glance back to Inquisitor Velos and the Sisters of Battle. They did not seem placated, so Sarai sought a different approach. I am well aware of the corruption spread by demonic forces, Inquisitor. Given the circumstances of your arrival, I have every right to be suspicious of those that are brought aboard my ship, but you have nothing to fear from me. True as that may be, I have had some issues with other Inquisitors saying they meant no ill will towards me. Inquisitor Velos replied. Sarai had done her research and had an idea of what the man was referring to, but had no chance of addressing this before Vulcan spoke up. Let us not fall into accusations of wrongdoing, my friends, he said. We are all seeking to perform the duties the Imperium has set upon us, and needless fear and bickering will only obstruct our paths. I am sure Miss Olivier meant no malice by her actions. The sisters seemed to relax at this, lowering their weapons as their focus drifted back towards Twilight. Inquisitor Velos said nothing, though Sarai could feel that some of his nervousness had subsided some. I know it may take some time for you to believe me, but I am on your side, Sarai started. Perhaps after we have arranged safe passage and boarding for your crew and a Mechanicus salvage of your ship, you may begin to see that. Your ship isn't much larger than mine, Velos countered. Even with the escorts it will be a tight fit. The Sword of Redemption is deceptively spacious, Lord Velos. It helps that Elias and his brothers are not aboard. And I'm sure the Mechanicus would not mind having a few extra hands to assist with towing your ship to drydock. A pause before Sarai shrugged. Consider it for now. If all else fails, I'm sure there are a few independent transports in the area that wouldn't mind a little extra money assisting with the rescue of the Empress student. I can help with some of the recovery work, Twilight offered, eagerly looking between Sarai and Inquisitor Velos. At least with coordination, anyway. I've been working on some ideas to get the crew off the Sanguinium Martyrs in my spare time, and maybe I could work out a few of the kinks with you before we start transporting everyone over. Terra Velos started, but Sarai was quick to speak first. Perhaps some other time, Sarai said, giving Twilight a smile to keep her placated. I have some other duties to attend to, and I am sure you all would like some time to rest. Twilight's enthusiasm waned. Well, I guess. It's settled, then. Sarai turned towards the Kozakin platoon behind her. My men will show you to your rooms and begin making arrangements for the rest of your team's arrival. Lord Velas, if you would come with me, we can contact the Mechanicus to recover your ship. If it's all the same to you, I think I would rather make sure the Empress student is secured before committing to any further actions. Doing his best to not expose himself quickly. Velas might have been young and headstrong, but he knew his job well enough. And if it keeps me away from Twilight Sparkle a little longer, all the better for him. Very well. I will send for you when preparations are made. The rooms provided turned out to be quite spacious, more akin to the guest rooms on a governor's personal ship than standard imperial barracks. Actual beds and utilities greeted the newcomers, with multiple racks for weapons and armor along with ample light to keep the quarters pleasantly illuminated depending on the ship's cycle. The hum of the ship seemed dull, as if the entire structure had powered down, leaving the guest quarters quiet save for the occasional disturbance of cleaning cherubs. The Lady Inquisitor was even kind enough to provide a healthy supply of rations for each room, complete with pure water and pieces of real fruit. Even for the Empress student, it is still a bit much. Matthias thought. At least she's not as self-righteous as Marcos was. Matthias turned, picking up the Valhallan's conversation as Alexis watched the corridor. No as intrusive, either. I haven't seen a single crew member or servitor that she could use to spy on us down here. She's a Lady Inquisitor, Alexis, Nikolai countered as he came up behind his brother. Who knows what kind of setup she has to keep an eye on her guests. And constantly watching the corridors will do us no good in laying low, Matthias said, drawing the two troopers back to him. Inquisitor Olivier has all the advantages now. Our only hope is to play along as best we can, keep our heads down until we get back to civilization and get Terra to the Empress. With all due respect, my lord, that's going to be rather difficult, especially if she's a mind reader. A pause before Alexis grinned. Granted, I can think of a few thoughts I wouldn't mind her reading. Keep those and I'll be the one to shoot you. Matthias replied. Admittedly, it is not the worst idea. White noise and nonsense data might be enough to keep the Inquisitor from prying too deep into our minds without warning. We're just troopers, my lord, Nikolai said. We only know what you tell us. What of Terra or you? Considering that she probably already knows Twilight's Azenas, I'll take what little I can get. Psychic resistance is something I have trained with before. After all, I've had Angelique under my care for longer than you have been in my service. Matthias straightened up. And I don't intend on leaving here with Terra any longer than she needs to, though I don't think that will be much of an issue. If you say so, my lord. Alexis turned back towards the hall, giving Matthias some time to reflect. He did not have long, for out of the shadows came an officer and a small squad of Kozakin, the man giving a salute once he was certain he was close enough to Matthias. Lord Velas, the officer said. Lady Olivier has requested an audience with you in her quarters. I am here to escort you there. Did she say why she wished to discuss matters there? Matthias asked. That is not a matter I was made aware of, the officer said. If you would please, Lord Matthias, Lady Olivier does not enjoy being kept waiting. I'll be the judge of that, Matthias thought, but he refrained from speaking further on the matter. Finally he gave a short nod, stepping out to meet the officer as the Valhallans formed up behind him. Very well, Matthias said. Lead on. The officer nodded, turning and starting off back down the hall while Matthias and his henchmen followed behind. The quietness of the guest quarters soon gave way to the usual rumblings of any imperial vessel, the dull roar of engines, choral music to complement, and the continued rustling of servitors and crewmen as they went about their duties. To Matthias' dismay the path took them back into the main hall, the glittering of gold-plated statues almost blinding him as they stepped in. Tapestries of all sorts broke up the seemingly unending line of statues, though Matthias noted none of them seemed to bear the red-headed visage of Lady Olivier among them. No real achievements to be seen, he mused. Either she is more humble than most, or she is newer to her position than she lets on. Their path took them away from the main hall, down another corridor lined with what appeared to be runes of some sort. Most Matthias could identify as typical anti-psychic wards, holy symbols and icons that he had learned since he was a child. Others, though, were far more alien in their design, swooping hieroglyphs that shimmered with energy as Matthias and the soldiers passed by. As Matthias inspected them, he saw a number of familiar patterns among the hieroglyphs, shapes resembling trees and sanctuaries breaking up the other odd twists and squiggles not too dissimilar from Twilight's own handwriting. Lord Velas, Matthias was snapped out of his inspection by the officer, the Kozakin having parted to reveal a door marked with the inquisitorial eye. Inquisitor Olivier is waiting for you inside. Your guards will have to stay with us for now. Forgive me if I do not feel safe without some form of protection, Matthias said. While he did have his pistol and some light armor under his robes, having a few bodies around him could be of some use against a fully prepared Lady Inquisitor. Inquisitor Olivier insisted to speak with you in private. She said that it concerns information in regards to the student, words meant for your ears only. Matthias said nothing, but he had a good idea of what exactly the Lady Inquisitor meant. Honestly, he would be surprised if she didn't already know about Twilight. Perhaps that's where the wards are from. I understand, he said finally, casting a glance to Alexis and Nikolai. Stay here until I return. My lord, are you sure this? Nikolai started before Matthias waved him off. If things go wrong, alert the sisters and Lord Vulcan. They should be enough to protect Terra. Nikolai hesitated, but eventually the trooper gave a short nod and stood at ease. Matthias turned and stepped towards the door, waiting as it slid open and he was able to step through to Inquisitor Olivier's quarters. Though the room was massive, easily half the size of a medium-sized mess hall, it was surprisingly sparse in its decor. Between two large windows giving a view of the ship's spine hung a faded tapestry of Sebastian Thor, the long-dead reformer, looking down on a floor populated by a few soft chairs and a small glass table. A bottle of wine stood with a pair of glasses on the table, and even from afar Matthias could see the faint remnants of condensation indicating that it had only recently been pulled from chilling. To the right Matthias saw two more doors, most likely leading to sleeping quarters, while the left side of the room was blocked from view by the wall jutting out farther than it had first appeared. Matthias stepped forward, sweeping his gaze around in case he had missed anything, when his vision fell upon the altar on the far wall. Atop a rack rested a suit of gold and red-powered armor, most likely Inquisitor Olivier's, giving it size and shape. Before the rack was the altar, on which rested a battered sniper rifle and a large greatsword that seemed to glow with a faint light. Anything beyond that was conjecture, for Inquisitor Olivier stood before the altar, her back to Matthias as she gazed up at her armor. Matthias said nothing, doing his best to shift his thoughts to random nonsense lest the Inquisitor probe his mind again. Do you know they chained down psychers aboard the black ships? Inquisitor Olivier asked, still not looking towards Matthias. I tend to focus my attention on things other than the domains of the other Ordos, Matthias replied. I was a child when I was taken aboard the black ships. I don't know if it was because of pity or fear some of the others would harm me, but I was kept in isolation all throughout my trip to Terra. A pause as Inquisitor Olivier turned her head, glimpsing Matthias out of the corner of her eye. My body was shackled, but my mind was not. And trapped with thousands of other confused and broken souls for months, years maybe, was not a position I would wish for any telepath. It was not enough of a warning if you go and freely poke around in the minds of your guests. Perhaps that was a bit harsh, but if it kept the Inquisitor on the back foot. An accident, nothing more. Inquisitor Olivier waved her hand and turned to face Matthias. The headband I wear keeps me from constantly hearing the thoughts of those around me, but even it cannot hold off the strongest of emotions such as that of your frustration at being so close to rescue and not even realizing it. Though I thank you for your concern, the situation you've presented does not exactly instill confidence in the security of myself or my charges. You speak of Twilight, then. Ripping the bandages off quickly, aren't we? Matthias said nothing as Inquisitor Olivier continued. I take it that there's more to such things than merely disguising her as Terra, is there? You're the telepath, you don't need me to answer that. Let's not be rude now, Inquisitor Velas. As much as you may distrust me, I am on your side. Matthias said nothing as Inquisitor Olivier stepped past him, crossing over to the table in the center of the room and picking up the wine. We all have blood on our hands, chains that have shackled us even if we appear free. Some are more bloodied than others, but I would never betray the Imperium or the Empress. Again Matthias said nothing, but he did notice a slight hesitation in the way the other Inquisitor said Empress. Past guilt, perhaps? That would be interesting considering her previous indications of hesitancy when dealing with Twilight. Prime would be in order. Would you care for a drink? Inquisitor Olivier asked, uncorking the wine and pouring herself a glass. I reviewed your service record, Lord Velas, and I'm surprised it never crossed through Ultramar at any point. Iaxian wine is a rare treasure in these times. I will have to pass for now, Matthias said, thoughts of drugged chalices crossing his mind before he pressed on. For someone that has been sent to recover Twilight, and one who said she wished to speak directly with the student, you seem rather disinterested in connecting with her. Parameters have changed. My orders were to recover the Empress student, nothing more. The woman shrugged as she took up her wine. I have done so, and have spoken enough with her to see she is in good hands. My task complete, I will convey you to Ultramar where you will be safe. Given what information I have gleaned about the schism, and what enemies seem to arrange against Twilight, I doubt that anywhere save directly in the Empress' presence would be considered safe. What foes? Matthias said nothing at first, as if waiting for Inquisitor Olivier to answer her own question. When she did not, Matthias continued. We were attacked by heretic forces, as you know. From what the survivors of the group on Solemnus told me, Twilight was targeted by a particularly powerful demon, perhaps something you might be familiar with. Demons do enjoy taking a myriad of forms, Inquisitor Olivier replied. From how you structured your speech, I guess you are not among that party. No. Only Twilight and the sisters returned. If you want a better idea of the demon that hunts her, you would be best to speak with any of them about what they saw. The sisters can be trusted, then? Why wouldn't they be? No sister of battle has fallen to the temptation of chaos in millennia, and they have been with Twilight almost as long as I have. Inquisitor Olivier fell silent, nursing her drink as she looked away from Matthias. I will have to speak with them on the matter, then, the Inquisitor said. It has been some time since I have worked alongside the sororitas. Is there more you can tell me about Twilight? There isn't much more to say, Matthias said, his left hand flexing as he continued. She's a skilled psyker and a decent fighter. A bit naive and sheltered, but the Empress thinks highly of her and her optimism. Does she? Inquisitor Olivier turned away. Even from his position on the other side of the room, Matthias could tell the answer had shaken the woman. The slight tremble of her hand, a tightening of her jaw, all indicated there was more the Inquisitor did not wish to say. Well, I am not surprised. The Empress would not make a mistake when elevating someone to the position of her trusted student. I've encountered a few people who have thought otherwise, Matthias replied. The most vocal of them met his end quite gruesomely. Though not at your hand, else you would have been lying in your debrief to the Ordo following your extraction from Caesarea. A pause as Olivier turned back to Matthias. That, at least, I received through official channels. Despite what you may think, sometimes the Ordos will cooperate with one another when the need arises. Given that the last Inquisitor that offered to help me tried shooting the student, I cannot say I am in need of much help from the other Ordos. Matthias shifted his stance before continuing. If we are done with pleasantries, I would like to return and make sure Twilight is resting properly. If you say so. The Mechanicus informed me that they will arrive within a month to salvage your vessel and bring it to Connor for repairs. Macragge will be more secure, though, so I suggest you find transport there to wait until the ship is finished. No use in asking for a ride, then? I'll consider it. Inquisitor Olivier took another sip of wine. As long as you keep the student away from me. Her optimism is welcome, but I have more important business to attend to within Ultramar. I will do what I can. Matthias turned to leave, stopping just before the door as another thought came to mind. Good luck on keeping her away, though, even with my help, the girl has a fascinating ability to get others to open up by their own volition. We shall see if that still holds up. Matthias turned and stepped out of the room, the door closing behind him as the Khazarkan and his henchmen straightened up at his return. I hope that your discussion with Lady Olivier was productive, the officer said. I will conduct you back to your quarters now. Matthias nodded, following after the officer as he once more inspected the runes around the hallway. Their exact purpose eluded him, for now, but there was no mistaking the unknown symbols for being anything other than script in Twilight's native tongue. Inquisitor Olivier knows more about Twilight than she would like to say, Matthias thought. I won't allow any dangers like that go unaddressed. Chapter 3.08, New Revelations. Progress on getting relief to the Sanguinium martyrs had slowed. Getting the surviving crew off the ship and safely aboard the Sword of Redemption and its escorts proceeded apace, but the Mechanicus salvage continued to delay their arrival. There were a few more strings Sarai could pull, small bits of blackmail and bribes that would smooth out the process in the short term, but one did not become a Lady Inquisitor by playing only to the short term. At the very least, it allowed her to pick up more about her new guests. Velos and his henchmen were to be expected of the Ordo Xenos, attentive, but not overly interesting beyond an odd question concerning technology. The Inquisitor himself had not approached Sarai beyond inquiries on the recovery process, and from what few probes Sarai could take without exposing herself, it was clear he had told no one about his conversation with her after they had arrived. There was also no clear indication that he suspected her of withholding more information, but only an idiot would take an Inquisitor's word at face value. Sarai was no idiot. That had gotten her killed in Equestria. Velos had been joined by two new companions, a matronly sister hospitaller and a young psyker practically oozing mental trauma. The little witch proved another excuse for Sarai to avoid having to speak directly with Velos, lest their powers intermingle and lead to one or the other leaking more than they let on. The Hospitaller had assured Sarai that Terra was doing much to help the other psyker, but even a student of Celestia had little hope in calming that damaged mind. Though it does say a lot for her optimism that she thinks she can do it, Sarai thought. At least Celestia has not gone about stamping that out. The Sisters of Battle were too close to Twilight Sparkle to confront. Devout servants of the Imperium they might have been, loyalty often had a way of crossing paths one did not want to take. Yes, as an Inquisitor Sarai would carry great authority in their eyes, but compared to Twilight Sparkle? One slip up and the ever-loyal sisters would have the student on her tail in no time at all. That left one person left to approach. And for a man of his stature, Vulcan was quite adept at keeping out of sight. Everything, you say? Sarai asked, turning back to one of her officers. Yes, my lady, the officer replied, giving a sheepish nod. We've checked every scanner and camera, and it seems he's made a clean sweep of the forge. I've tried dispatching servitors and workers to the forge to perhaps see what he is doing, but all reports have shown that he is not there when they arrive. How does he know we are coming, and how can he hide so easily? The salamanders are not exactly known for their stealth. We are unsure. Our current theory is perhaps one of Inquisitor Velas' henchmen has been tipping him off to our patrols. Sarai said nothing, resting her chin on her knuckle as she thought. Velas had not said for how long Vulcan had been aboard his ship, but the Primarch's friendliness meant building a rapport between them all would have been child's play. Enough that he would get them to spy for him? No, this is the Primarch of the Salamanders, he would not stoop that low. Hold off on the patrols for now, Sarai said, lowering her hand as she continued. It is obvious Lord Vulcan is suspicious of us, and prying may only make the matter worse. I will try and speak with him directly to see if there is any way to resolve these differences. If you feel that is wise, my lady. The officer nodded, stepping aside to allow Sarai to pass. While an idle period had arisen aboard the ship, meaning most of the crew would be resting and praying, Sarai still kept to the maintenance tunnels to avoid drawing attention. As the tunnels were meant for servitors and tech priests, not flesh and blood inquisitors, her path was slow and arduous as she ducked and squeezed through low clearance doors and narrow halls, bits of machinery scraping against her uniform as she continued onward. Sarai slowed as the air around her began to gently heat up. The forge was always one of the warmest places on the ship, and the Inquisitor could feel herself sweating as she neared. Rather than continue on the normal path, Sarai stopped and began to run her hand along the wall, sweeping her hand across the rough metal. The tech priests would never change the schematics of this ship, she thought. That should put it here we are. Sarai pressed down on a small panel near her foot. There was a clunk before the section of the wall parted, Sarai stepping into a room that could easily fit a Terminator with full gear. An old cooling system hung in disrepair above her head, small bits of condensation dripping to the floor next to her. But Sarai paid no attention, for she had what she was looking for, a gap in the cooling pipes that gave her a sweeping view of the forge and all that were inside. Vulcan was there, his back to Sarai as he worked the forge. The Primarch was no longer armored, instead wearing a pair of work pants and a tunic that were just enough to cover his massive frame. The light of the flames seemed to glisten off his dark skin, giving him the appearance less of a man and more akin to some spirit seeking an end to its wandering. Even from afar Sarai could feel her breath tightening with awe. The Primarchs had always been spoken in terms beyond mere human understanding, but to watch one working in person. She was snapped from her thoughts by the sound of a door opening. Vulcan turned, and Sarai could see a small figure stepping out of the shadows. Twilight Sparkle. Ah, young Terra, Vulcan said, his voice warm and welcoming. I was wondering if perhaps my invitation had been intercepted. No, it was just a bit confusing. Twilight Sparkle said. Your handwriting was a bit muddied and vague, all things considered. Apologies for that, my dear, I did not want anyone spoiling the surprise I have for you. Surprise? Sarai inched closer, watching as Vulcan ducked around the forge and Twilight Sparkle drew closer. The girl was still radiating curiosity and innocence, peeking around the forge like a child searching for gifts during Sanguinala. She stepped back as Vulcan returned with a cart, a new suit of armor resting atop it. That's my armor, Twilight Sparkle started. I was quite impressed by the metalwork, Vulcan said, bringing the cart to a stop as he continued. The adamantium weave is quite subtle, and the psychic circuitry is like nothing I have seen in the last 15 millennia. I would love a chance to learn from the Empress how she performed this. A pause before Vulcan continued. I made a few modifications, nothing too serious lest I damage the circuitry, but I hope you find them satisfactory. Vulcan lifted up the chest plate of the armor. I used a larger weave to replace some of the stiffer segments, especially those around your chest and torso. This should provide you with more flexibility and less chafing when you turn and twist about. Wouldn't that risk making the armor softer? Yes, but the existing weave is already quite tight. You shouldn't be in too much danger. Vulcan set down the chest piece before moving on to an arm. What I really hope to show you is this. Sarai watched as Twilight took a step back, her curiosity shifting to surprise. Sorrow? The student was not being very clear. Is she stammered? Is that Mershan's flamer? Sarai looked, spotting the flamer nozzle strapped to the side of the armor. The gauntlet of the forge has served me and my sons well, Vulcan said. I am certain that it will serve you equally. But I can't accept this, Twilight continued, though her hesitancy did not seem to stop her from reaching up to stroke the weapon. It's one of your relics, isn't it? I shouldn't. You are correct in that it is mine, Vulcan said, lowering the arm down. As such, it is mine to decide what to do with. To be truthful, I had planned to destroy the gauntlet and many other relics like it in my grief during Horus' betrayal, but a word from my son spared it from the fire. Sarai's jaw clenched as she heard this. With so little knowledge left from the heresy, to learn that a Primarch almost destroyed much of his life's work. I suppose they are closer to men than we ever realized. My son Mershan was close to you, and I will not deny you a chance to cherish his memory. Consider this a gift to ensure that never fades away, else you will lose far more than you could possibly imagine. Sarai shifted her gaze back to Twilight Sparkle, watching as the younger woman regarded the weapon for a moment. Finally she turned back to Vulcan, a sad smile crossing her lips. Thank you, Vulcan, she said. I promise you I'll never forget this. You are quite welcome, young Terra, Vulcan replied as he turned back to the forge. I was thinking of some other means to ensure your safety, perhaps a shield of some kind, but with the tools I have on hand I could only perform some basic enhancements. Maybe Inquisitor Olivier could help with that. Twilight offered. I would if you were not being so secretive, Sarai thought. I considered that, Vulcan said, giving a sigh before he continued. But while I may be more open towards her than your friends, I feel she is not willing to be open with all of us in the same manner. Her surveillance was also a bit bothersome. You're feeling the same way? Sarai blinked, turning back to Twilight as the girl gave a huff. I keep thinking that maybe it was something I did, otherwise she wouldn't be so unwilling to talk to me. But that makes no sense since I've never seen her before in my entire life. Even the most earnest and loyal can be intimidated by those they see as above them. It was one of the many problems my brothers chose to ignore. But I'm not above anyone, Twilight protested, taking a step towards Vulcan. I'm just me, Terra. Ever since the Empress returned I've been set on a pedestal that no one wants to upset, but I'm no different from any other man or woman that serves her. Sarai suppressed a scoff. Surely the student of Celestia would not be so ready to stoop that low. She never chose a student for her spinelessness, after all. But then, that turned out so well for you. These things cannot be forced, dear Terra, Vulcan said, resting a hand on Twilight's shoulder. This Inquisitor is still within the mindset she had before all this trouble came upon us. She is not one to be feared, but you need to allow her to make her judgments first before reaching out to her. I know Twilight shook her head. Sorry. I've probably been more stressed out in the last month than I have at any other point in my life. It's a bit hard to get back from. I am sure, but you are doing so well right now. Vulcan gave Twilight's shoulder a friendly pat before he broke away. Though I must ask, why do you seek out the Inquisitor's attention so readily? There was a lengthy pause, and Sarai found herself drawing closer, as if leaning against the pipes that concealed her would grant her a better vantage point. She seems lost. Sarai blinked as Twilight shook her head. I don't know how or why, but she seems like she's trying to reach something, but she's not sure what it is. You gathered all of that just from speaking with her for only a few minutes? Vulcan asked. I'm good with information, I suppose. Twilight shrugged. But besides the normal evasiveness when you don't want someone to know something, there was a bit of hesitancy when she was speaking to me and to you, like there was more she wanted to say but no way to say it. And I don't mean like the typical praise and adoration I'm sure you get all the time, but something personal. I see a pause before Vulcan turned fully towards Twilight. She did say she was a telepath. Perhaps it has something to do with her powers? Maybe, but that would require a few passive readings that would take a lot more than a few minutes to process unless she's figured out some avenues that I don't know about. Another pause before Twilight brought a finger to her chin. A good possibility since telepathy isn't one of my strongest subjects. She's also older than me so she's had more time to figure it out than I have, though how far she can delve without straining herself is another thing entirely. At any rate, I feel that there's more Inquisitor Olivier wants to tell us, but it's burning up inside her so much she doesn't know how or when to say it. Now Sarai stepped back. She had figured that Twilight would be observant, but this? Perhaps Velas was correct in his assessment that the girl was relentless at getting others to open up. I am sure you will find your chance, Vulcan replied. Perhaps you should speak with your friends on this matter. Well, you're my friend, aren't you? There was a lengthy pause before Vulcan laughed, turning and giving Twilight another pat on the shoulder. I suppose you are right, he said, his chuckles dying down. And I am honored that you consider me a friend. Sarai remained silent, her jaw tightening as she finished processing the scene before her. Twilight Sparkle was many things, curious, naive, sheltered, and yet, her earnestness could not be denied. And you continue to hide away from her. What does that say about you? Sarai turned and squeezed back into the hallway, taking the path back to her quarters even slower now. One way or another, Twilight Sparkle had become too intriguing to ignore. All that remained was how much of the past Sarai was ready to rip open. I think this is as close as we're going to get to the real thing, Matthias said as he looked to the paper before him. He had sketched out a rough version of what the wards around Inquisitor Olivier's room had looked like, Alexis and Nikolai adding in whatever he had missed. The work had been carefully executed, as Matthias had wanted to keep the information secret from both the Inquisitor and Twilight for as long as possible, if only to ensure that they would not interrupt and raise more suspicions. If you say so, my lord, Alexis said, taking a sip of Tana before continuing. I still think one of us could go into that hall and map everything out. Maybe take Angelique and pass it off as her wandering about. Olivier isn't some underpaid administratum clerk that will take whatever excuse she's presented with. Matthias countered, giving the Valhallan a look. If she finds us and thinks we're intruding in her work, we'll be up against the wall before any of us can invoke the Empress authority. Though perhaps Twilight's presence might stay her hand for a little while. That she hasn't already shows she's got some modicum of patience, Nikolai said. Patience my ass. She's making it out like she doesn't even care we're here. Alexis pushed away his mug as he turned to his brother. She's set no guards, given us no interrogations, not even news about how the war's going. It's like we don't even exist in the little world she's set up for herself. That's enough, Alexis, Matthias said, his voice rising. Both troopers fell silent and turned to Matthias as he continued. We will make do with the information we have, as we have done before. Inquisitor Olivier has most of the advantages in information and location, so we cannot provoke her any further. Is that understood? Perfectly, my lord. The two Valhallans said. Good. You're dismissed. Alexis and Nikolai rose, heading towards the door as Matthias looked back down at the drawing. Had he known he'd been facing this kind of challenge, he would have asked Twilight to teach him how to interpret her hieroglyphs, but now was not the time to be focusing on what could have been. Especially if it meant facing the danger of now. You wanted to see me, Matthias? Matthias looked up as Twilight drifted into the room. She was dressed in a loose shirt and a long skirt, completely at ease despite all the suspicion around her. Amazing that some of her innocence remains. Yes. Come have a seat. Twilight nodded and took Nikolai's chair as Matthias continued. You're settling in well? As well as I can, Twilight said with a sigh. I miss my room back on your ship, to be honest, but anyway, I've been getting back into my training regimes now that I got my armor back from Vulcan. I've been trying to get used to the flamer he installed, but she paused, giving Matthias a sad smile. It's been a slow process. I can imagine. Other than that, there isn't really a whole lot to do, Twilight continued. All my books are in storage and Sarai won't let me look at her library, and the Empress still hasn't contacted me yet. At the end of all things, I'm bored. She slumped over, looking up at Matthias and giving an almost comical pout. I don't suppose you've gotten around to convincing Sarai to talk to me, have you? I think there are more pressing matters, some of which you might be able to help me with. Twilight raised an eyebrow as Matthias pushed the drawing towards her. Remember when we first arrived, and Inquisitor Olivier asked for an audience with me? Yes, Twilight sat up straight again. It's been a busy month, but I remember. What of it? When I approached her room, I saw a warding of some kind in the hallway nearby. This is a close approximation to the pattern that I saw there. And you didn't recognize it? Twilight asked, picking up the paper to examine it closely. I've been doing a lot of studying, but I haven't been able to study every branch or interpretation of magic in the galaxy. What makes you think I'll be able to identify it? A hunch I'd rather not be true. Twilight looked back to Matthias again before looking down at the image. There was a lengthy pause before her face lit up in a smile. Oh, I see. It's an Aegis weave. A what? Matthias asked. An Aegis weave. Princess Celestia taught me these for my 14th birthday. Twilight set the paper down and pointed to the larger set of symbols on the edges. See these here? That's a low-level warding spell, kind of like the prayers the sisters have or some of the weaker dampeners you've put on Angelique. Enough to stop low-power psychic intrusion, yes, Matthias started. But a determined psyker can break through those without issue. That's why Angelique has additional dampeners when she begins to lose herself to her prophecies. That's where the second layer of the weave comes in. Twilight's finger moved to the hieroglyphs near the center. This is a reflection spell, basically a weaker version of my combat shields fused with an object. Again, at base form it doesn't do much. You could probably break the spell with a weak punch if you really wanted to. But set it on a psycho-reactive surface like brass or copper along with a warding spell, and you have an Aegis weave. A good weave could probably take some of my tougher shots without breaking while only requiring half the power to enchant it compared to a normal psychic warding. And you learned this when? Oh, I asked about it a few days before I turned 14, Twilight's smile grew bigger. Celestia was having a slow period of diplomacy, so I thought, what the heck? Why not ask her about some higher level theory? It was a good day spent, if I do say so myself. Back in Equestria. Yes, back. Twilight's smile began to sink as the realization struck. In Equestria she looked down at the drawing, then back to Matthias, then back to the drawing. Wait, how the heck could Sarai know about Aegis weaves? This is equestrian magic, not Imperium. That is what I wanted to tell you, Matthias said. Twilight was too panicked to respond to this. And no, it must be a mistake, she stammered, picking up the paper and scanning it thoroughly. A mistranslation. Maybe some obscure world has the same writing style. No, this is clearly equestrian hieroglyph. Even if it wasn't, it still doesn't explain how she would know the proper process for the weave. Parallel universe schools of magic? No, that can't be it. Multiversal theory says that there would be changes in how magic like this works across dimensions, though my own travels would say otherwise, but I can't think of that right now. Twilight let out a squeak as she looked back up at Matthias. We need to approach this carefully without throwing around panic theories. Now, Matthias took the drawing away from Twilight before continuing. Is there any way this information could have leaked from your universe to this one? No, Twilight said, taking a moment to try and compose herself before continuing. Not any way I know, at least. The path through the warp between my universe and this one is so vast that any thought or idea would be shredded to nothingness before it got anywhere close. If Sarai can perform a fully functioning Aegis weave, she would have needed to learn it from someone. A demon, perhaps? You did say chaos attacked your universe before. Who's to say they did not bring something back when they were repulsed? Maybe, but the Aegis weave was developed a few hundred years after Nightmare Moon's rebellion. Most if not all the demons would have been driven out of Equestria before then. Twilight tapped a finger against her chin. It's not impossible that one might have slipped through and brought it back here, but what use would a demon have with a protection spell like this, and why would Sarai have it surrounding her quarters instead of a dungeon or something? A pause before Twilight spoke again. Matthias, say I'm where Sarai's room is. What way would the wards be facing? Matthias looked at the picture for a moment, perusing his memory before setting it down and turning it around. Like this. That's what I thought. Face it that way and it would reflect any psychic powers back to the room. Sarai probably uses it to keep her psychic powers under control. That still doesn't explain how she learned it, though, Matthias pointed out, taking back the paper. If anything, it makes it seem like you think she's possessed. Possessed? No, nothing like that. Twilight shook her head. Remember that thing that appeared on Rin's world after all the Tyranids died? Right after he showed up I felt this numbness fall over me, like what I saw was a greater abomination than any alien or the like. Didn't you feel that too? Matthias shook his head, causing Twilight to deflate slightly. Well, that's what it feels like to be in the presence of a possessed person. I didn't feel that around Sarai. So if she's not possessed, then what is she? An equestrian, like me. Silence reigned between the two, Twilight looking away and clenching her hands together. Matthias looked down at the drawing of the Aegis weave, trying to think of the next thing to say. How? He asked, snapping Twilight's attention back to him. How could she end up here if she's from your world? I don't know, and that's what scares me. Twilight replied. To physically cross from one universe to the next you need a serious amount of psychic power to both open the path and get through without being driven insane, killed, or both. Celestia and I only managed it because, well, she's the Empress, but she still needed Luna to provide enough of a conduit to cross the barrier into the Imperium in the first place. Celestia would have told me if she sent someone else ahead of us, and anything else that rivals her power either died centuries ago or is currently trapped in stone. Presumably all those who have died did so before this weave was created? Matthias asked. Twilight gave a short nod, drawing a frown from Matthias. Is there any other way to make a conduit like this? Something akin to a warp portal? It's possible. Twilight replied. There were a few experiments with mirrors during the early ages of Equestria. Princess Celestia even has one locked away in her castle somewhere, but she never told me if they actually worked or not. She shook her head before continuing. It's a lot of conjecture I can't confirm. Oh, I hate it when this happens. If only the princess was back. Well, she is not responding to your cries, Matthias said. That means we're on our own. What will you do? What can I do? Twilight asked before rising to her feet. I have to talk to Sarai and find out who she is. Twilight made to leave, but Matthias reached forward and took her by the hand. Twilight, think this through, he hissed. While you may have absolute faith in your countrymen, there has to be at least some who are not on the side of light. And think, if your world is so perfect, why would one come here without the Empress' assistance or permission? What? You think she's a chaos worshipper? No, but Olivier is dangerous nonetheless. Furthermore, she knows about you. Do you have any idea what a Lady Inquisitor can do with deeply personal information about anyone, especially the Empress' personal student? Twilight grew worried, her eyes darting around. She wouldn't try to blackmail me, would she? Twilight stammered. To what end I don't know, but I wouldn't put it past her. Without the Empress' protection, you are at far greater risk of being discovered and having that information turned against you. But she hasn't tried to act against me, Twilight countered. She's gone out of her way to avoid me, actually. And she stopped, chewing her lip for a moment before continuing. She seems hurt. Matthias could feel his emotions cooling, and soon let go of Twilight's hand. You noticed her hesitations too, then? Twilight gave a short nod in response. What do you think? I think she wants to tell me something, but for some reason she either can't or won't, Twilight sighed. Maybe it's about her being an equestrian, maybe it isn't. But whatever it is, I need to know what it is. I can help her. Inquisitors aren't exactly known for accepting outside counseling so readily. Matthias paused before giving a sigh. But I suppose at this point there's only so much I can say to dissuade you. Just be careful, and come to me if you feel you're in danger. I will. A pause before Twilight spoke again. Matthias, I know this is probably the last situation you want to deal with right now, but you have to trust me on this. If I can figure out who Sarai really is, and if we can work together on these matters, then we'll end up much safer than if we just let this sit. If you can. I just want you to be prepared in case your faith in the kindness of others falls short. Twilight gave a short nod and turned, stepping back out into the hallway as Matthias took his seat once more. Part of him wanted to call her back, to at least assign one of his henchmen or the sisters to guard her, but he found himself at a loss for words. Another equestrian, he thought. My life continues to grow more complex with every day. One of Sarai's crewmen had been helpful enough to point Twilight towards the Inquisitor's quarters, Twilight taking the path slowly as she contemplated what to say. Should I just come out and ask? She thought, turning another corner before shaking her head. No, she'd just be put on the defensive. I should ease my way into that conversation. Maybe this was a bad idea. I should have asked Matthias for advice. She stopped, her hands tightening again before she shook her head. No, I can do this. I need to figure out who Sarai is. Her resolve renewed, Twilight quickened her pace as she continued onward, keeping her mind clear in case Sarai's reach was further than she thought. As she continued, Twilight felt a shift in the air around her and a chill run down her spine. She could hear faint whispers, nothing more than fragments but still enough to keep Twilight on edge. A lot of psychers have passed through these halls, she mused. Why? That line of thought ended as she came to the end of the hall, spotting the stylized eye of the Inquisition that Twilight guessed indicated Sarai's living quarters. Taking a deep breath, Twilight stepped up to the door and knocked, using a small amount of her power to make sure she was heard. There was a pause before the door opened, revealing Sarai. She had traded in her uniform for a nightgown and robe, her hair still held back by her headband but now pinned to keep the rest of the excess out of her eyes. Twilight also found her eyes drifting down, her breath catching as she saw the multitude of scars across the Inquisitor's arm. The scars appeared thickest around Sarai's wrist, a ragged mess of red and white tissue just barely covered beneath a series of blue tattoos designed to look like a setting sun. Miss Terra, Sarai said, her voice even as she tucked her arm back under her robe. Is something the matter? Twilight started, chewing her lip before her thoughts returned. I had a few questions I wanted to ask you. May I come in? It is rather late, Sarai countered. Perhaps we could discuss this at another time? I don't mean to be so intrusive, but I can't let this sit overnight. A pause before Twilight continued. Please. I promise I won't stay too long. Sarai looked Twilight up and down, Twilight doing her best not to chew her lip. Finally the older woman gave a sigh and opened the door further. I suppose I could spare a few minutes, she said, stepping aside to allow Twilight to enter. Please come in. Make yourself comfortable. Would you care for a drink? I'm okay. Twilight nodded rapidly, stepping further into the room as Sarai closed the door behind her. The room was sparsely decorated, though Sebastian Thor had returned in the form of a large tapestry hanging over the far wall. Beneath the tapestry were a series of windows giving them a sweeping view of the Sword of Redemption, Twilight watching as maintenance craft crisscross the cruiser on their daily routines. Twilight turned to her left, seeing a large altar beneath a rack containing Sarai's armor, atop of which rested an old rifle and a massive sword. Twilight cocked her head to one side as she saw a small picture resting on the altar, though Sarai had returned to her before she could move to investigate. I do not know your preferences for drink, the Inquisitor said, placing a glass of red wine in Twilight's hand. But this is a lighter wine, just enough to help you relax before sleeping. Oh, thank you. Twilight accepted the glass, taking a moment to swirl it before speaking again. With all that's going on, I suppose I haven't really given myself enough time to relax. As is typical of our times, Sarai said, taking a drink from her own glass as she glided towards a chair. I would not recommend letting yourself get too loose, though. Alcoholism is not becoming any servants of the Imperium save perhaps properly determined Valhallans. Twilight let out a short chuckle at this, but quickly got herself under control as Sarai continued. Come, sit. Twilight nodded her thanks and crossed to an open chair, taking a seat before Sarai spoke. Now then, what is on your mind? I'd read it myself, but I am not so rude as to rip information from the unwilling mind of a guest. Oh, thank you, Twilight said, raising her glass to her lips before taking a small sip. The wine was fruity, though the undercurrent of alcohol did sting her tongue. Anyway, I was speaking with some of my friends and well, they're a bit nervous about you. I did not become a Lady Inquisitor because I was easy to get along with, Sarai said. Though I take it there is more than just intimidation. They say you've been a bit secretive and aloof. The last Twilight stopped herself as memories of Marcos and Caesarea returned, her free hand trembling before she got back under control. The last time we dealt with someone like that didn't end well for anyone. Ibrahim Marcos, you mean? Twilight choked, looking to Sarai as she took another drink. Don't worry, I got that from the official report on the Caesarea operation, not your mind. Would it interest you to know the same man was the one who discovered me? Oh, I didn't realize that he was. The man was an ass who tore me from the only people that cared for my life, Sarai hissed, turning away from Twilight before she continued. I am glad to know he is burning in hell for his actions. Twilight said nothing, though her worry had shifted once more. Sarai said nothing before composing herself, turning back to Twilight and giving a smile. Apologies, I seem to have let a few old demons out. Understand that I am not Marcos, but my duties have called me away more than you all may be used to. I gathered. Twilight gave a nod, some of her earlier composure returning. How long have you been doing this? How long? Sarai asked before chuckling. Oh Tara, didn't your mother ever tell you it was rude to ask a woman her age? Twilight's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, her next words coming out as a strangled squeak. I didn't mean to. I understand. No offense taken, Sarai chuckled again before she took another drink. I have been in service to the Inquisition in some form or another since I was 5, give or take. Her voice grew solemn as she continued. Truth be told, my entry into their service was both drawn out and traumatizing, such that I don't even know my true age. Really? Traveling through the warp while chained down and surrounded by madmen does not do wonders for one's perception of time. All I do know is that I have been a full Inquisitor for just shy of 22 years, and a Lady Inquisitor for the last 10. Oh, Twilight paused, looking down at her wine as she chose her next words. And during that time, have you ever had memories? Memories? Sarai asked, one eyebrow raised. Memories of a different time, before you became an Inquisitor and all. Twilight looked up. Kind of like déjà vu, where you know that you've been somewhere in the past but for the life of you you can't recall the exact moments. There was a lengthy pause, Sarai allowing her gaze to drift about the room. Twilight wanted to know what exactly she was tracking, but decided against speaking. That's why you came here, isn't it Twilight? Sarai asked, finally turning back to Twilight. When she did not respond, the Inquisitor continued. No denial? No accusations of me bringing falsehoods against you? Why bother? Twilight countered. You're a telepath, I'd be surprised if you didn't know about me the moment I walked on board your ship. You're quite deductive, Sarai replied, setting her wine glass aside. I would have expected nothing less from Celestia's personal student. So you are from Equestria, then? Twilight asked, setting her own drink down before continuing. Matthias and I thought so, what with you having a perfectly cast Aegis weave guarding your room, but well, I didn't want to be intrusive. Really? You've been secretive, yes, but your privacy is still your own. Sarai raised an eyebrow as Twilight backed up. And I know I'm breaching that privacy right now, but I needed to make sure you really were on our side. And I would like to keep things that way, Sarai replied, her hands tightening. If you knew the truth, I am sure you would have some objections. After all that she stopped herself, looking past Twilight before her head sank. I think we've had enough for tonight. I'd suggest you go back to your room and rest, forget this ever happened. Sarai. Twilight rose from her seat, crossing to lay a hand on the Inquisitor's shoulder. I don't want the two of us to keep dancing around each other like this. I know you're a good person, and I know there's more that you want to tell me. But I need to know just who are you? There was a long pause, Sarai reaching up to massage her chin as Twilight drew back to give her some space. Finally, the older woman sighed. I would be lying if I said I was a good person, she said, raising her head to look at Twilight. There are things in my past that I am not proud of, things that I strive every day to correct, and perhaps I may never reach that point. I too once served Celestia, much as you do now. She was my teacher, my friend. The Inquisitor choked, her jaw tightening as her eyes darted about. My name, my old name I suppose, is Sunset Shimmer. I was Celestia's personal student before you were. Twilight blinked. Sarai, no. Sunset's words washed over her as she took in everything that she just learned. Sunset Shimmer? She asked. Yes, Sunset said, giving a short nod as she continued. Now, I can understand if you're confused, but rest assured I am not. As in the Sunset Shimmer? Sunset blinked as she looked at Twilight again. You know of me? Do I? Twilight cried, squealing as she brought her fists to her cheeks. Excitement pushed aside worry, and Twilight found herself bouncing in her spot as she continued. I mean, oh my gosh, I'm talking with Sunset Shimmer. Gah. I mean, you're like one of my biggest heroes. You're a fan? Sunset asked, drawing back in her seat. Why wouldn't I be? You're the leading expert on mental and empathic magic. I spent 3 days binge reading all 4 volumes of your empathy and telepathic conjuring, twice. Sunset's breath caught, and she rose to turn away from Twilight. So caught up in her excitement, Twilight barely noticed. I always wanted to meet you, see the genius behind all that work, maybe get an autograph. Twilight blushed, massaging the back of her head as she continued on. I talked with Princess Celestia about you, but she never said much. She always seemed sad when I brought it up, but that doesn't matter. You're here now. But how did you get here in the first place? By now Sunset had turned away from Twilight fully, but that did little to stop her as Twilight stepped up to be closer to the other woman. Was it a magical accident? Did you mess up a teleportation spell? Was it one of those magic mirrors from the time of Star Swirl that I read about? Twilight. Ooh, I know. You're on a secret mission from Princess Luna that not even Celestia knows about, and your success means some future great evil will be stopped completely. Twilight allowed herself a short chuckle. If that's what it is, I don't want to brag, but I know a thing or two about great evils myself. We could compare notes, have study sessions. Oh, this is going to be so much. Twilight stopped, stepping closer to Sunset before continuing. Sunset, why are you crying? You're just a fan. Sunset blinked, her eyes darting between Twilight and the pool of tears that had gathered around her. She sniffed, wiping her eyes before she turned to Twilight. Sorry, she said. It's just seeing you brought back a lot of memories from the past, not always good ones, I'm afraid. Twilight's face fell, and she drew away from Sunset as a myriad of thoughts drifted through her mind. Did I do something wrong? Twilight asked. I'm sorry, Sunset. I was just so excited to see some pony I admired. You shouldn't admire me, Twilight, Sunset said, her voice harsh. I'm not. I did not come here by my own volition. This is my penance for the sins I committed against Equestria and you. But we've never met before. There was a lengthy pause, Sunset looking away as Twilight waited for an answer. Finally the other woman sighed, turning to face Twilight fully before continuing. You're a sparkle, she started, moving back to her seat as Twilight returned to hers. You know what it's like to be part of a legacy, to see the work that your ancestors built in centuries past. Your family founded the Daughters of Manhattan, gave Celestia her first student after Luna's fall, practically wrote the curriculum still used at magic schools the world over. Even if you don't show it, a certain pride runs through your blood, the knowledge that you've helped to build Equestria into what it is today and that you will continue to shape its future long after you've passed. Well, yes, Twilight replied, tightening her hands again before she spoke. I've tried my best to stay humble about it, though. I'm just a pony at the end of the day. You're a greater woman than I am. Then Sunset gave a bitter laugh at this before continuing. My family has always been closely tied to the Everfree Sentinels, the premier magic users among Celestia's armies. It was a shimmer that helped calm the unrest in Canterlot before the war with the Crystal Empire, and my family has had more ponies to hold the title of Great Mage of the Red than any other in the nation, and my mother was the most recent. You can imagine that in such a privileged position I received a great deal of attention. I was given the best spell books, the best tutors, even Princess Celestia took me on as a student when I was old enough. Any information I wanted, any spell or incantation I wanted to practice, all was given to me save for one branch. Chaos magic, Twilight said, drawing a look from Sunset. I asked Celestia about spells like that once. She told me I wasn't ready and that I should focus on my other studies first. And? Well, what else was I supposed to do? When your mentor tells you you're not ready for something, you're probably not ready. And well, I did have a lot of other things I wanted to try out first before going down that rabbit hole. I didn't think so at the time, Sunset countered. What right did she have to restrain me? I was the daughter of one of the most powerful unicorns in the world, a student of dozens of different schools of magic. I'd written books, given short lectures, even tried writing some of my own spells. What was so special about chaos that I would be denied access to it? There was a pause as Sunset looked away from Twilight. I thought she was holding out on me, belittling my skills, and I became resentful. I pressured other unicorns to tell me about their combat experiences, broke into the wings of Celestia's library I wasn't allowed access to, read through historical accounts to try and piece together rituals and incantations. When Celestia caught me planning to use some of my own blood for a conjuring spell, she sent me back to my mother for additional research and discipline. Things only got worse from there. I fought and bickered with my mother for weeks, trying the same stupid stunts that had gotten me banished from Canterlot in the first place, though I didn't realize it at the time. All the time the allure of chaos grew deeper, and I craved that power even more. I thought I'd gotten enough information from my home, so after one fight too many I grabbed all my things and teleported back to Canterlot, hoping I could show Celestia what I'd learned and that I was ready. That was when I learned about you and everything fell apart. End of chapter 3.08, New Revelations.